A light morning fog blanketed Los Angeles as Dr. Michael Bennett pulled up in front of St. Gabriel's Orphanage. He stared at the aged structure, a strange unease creeping over him. The place shouldn't have felt familiar, yet something about it unsettled him deeply. Michael, a man in his mid-40s, carried the weight of worry on his face, the lines deepening as he walked toward the entrance. His task was simple: to provide free medical care to the children, but an unsettling feeling lingered that there was more to this visit. Inside, he was met by a gentle nun, Sister Margaret, who thanked him warmly for coming. As she guided him through the halls, explaining the children's needs, Michael barely paid attention. His eyes wandered over the walls adorned with children's artwork until, passing a room, he saw her. A girl, about 9 years old, sat alone in a corner, focused on her drawing. It wasn't her messy brown hair or plain clothes that caught his eye, but the bracelet on her wrist, a simple silver band with a tiny engraving. Michael froze, his heart racing. That bracelet. It was identical to the one he had given his daughter, Lily, before she vanished 6 years ago. "Sister Margaret," he said, his voice strained. "Who is that girl?" The nun followed his gaze and smiled softly. "Oh, that's Emma. She came to us a few months ago. She's a special child, but she's had a difficult life." Michael barely heard the last words. His eyes were fixed on the bracelet, a symbol of his darkest memories. Slowly, he approached Emma. The girl looked up as he knelt beside her, but said nothing, her curious eyes watching him. "Where did you get that bracelet, Emma?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though desperation clawed at him. Emma glanced at the bracelet, touching it gently. "I've always had it," she replied simply. "They said my mom gave it to me." The words hit Michael like a punch. He felt the ground tilt beneath him. "Your mom? Do you know where she is now?" Emma shook her head, her eyes clouding with sadness. "No, she's gone. I don't remember much about her." A whirlwind of emotions, hope, pain, and a desperate need for answers consumed him. He knew he had to learn more about this girl and the bracelet. It couldn't be a coincidence. That night, as he drove home, Michael's mind raced. He needed to return to the orphanage. He needed to dig deeper into Emma's story. Above all, he needed to know if there was any link between her and his missing daughter. The thought that Lily might still be alive, or that he might finally uncover what happened to her, made his heart pound. But he also knew this search could lead him into dangerous territory. The first clue was in his hands, and he was determined to follow it, no matter the cost. The next morning, Michael stood outside St. Gabriel's Orphanage again, his resolve bordering on obsession. The memory of the bracelet, and the haunting possibility it was connected to Lily, had kept him awake all night. He had to know more. Sister Margaret greeted him with a warm, slightly puzzled smile. "Dr. Bennett, it's good to see you again so soon. Did you forget something yesterday?" Michael forced a polite smile. "Yes, sister. I was hoping to spend more time with the children today, especially Emma. There's something about her that caught my attention." Sister Margaret nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Emma is a sweet child, but she's been through a lot. If you think you can help her, I'm sure she'd appreciate the company." Michael followed her down the familiar halls until they reached the room where he had seen Emma the day before. She sat in the same spot, absorbed in her drawings. This time, when she looked up and saw Michael, a small smile crossed her lips. "Hello, Emma," Michael greeted gently as he sat beside her. "What are you drawing?" Emma held up the paper. It was a simple sketch of a house surrounded by trees and a bright yellow sun. But what caught Michael's eye was the figure by the house, a woman holding a child's hand. "Is this you?" he asked, pointing to the child in the drawing. Emma nodded. "And that's my mom," she said softly, tracing the figure with her finger. Michael swallowed hard. "Do you remember your mom, Emma? Do you remember anything about her?" Emma hesitated, her expression clouding. "A little," she admitted. "She was very nice. But she went away, and I came here." Michael felt a mix of sympathy and frustration. He needed more information, but couldn't push too hard. "And this bracelet?" he asked, carefully taking her wrist to examine the silver band. "You said your mom gave it to you." Emma nodded again. "Yes, but I don't remember when. It's always been with me." Michael's heart sank. The bracelet was identical to the one he had given Lily, down to the small engraving inside. He turned Emma's wrist, reading the words he knew by heart. "For Lily with love." A chill ran down his spine. It was Lily's bracelet. His mind raced. How did Emma come to have it? Could it mean Lily was still alive? Or was this some cruel twist of fate? "Emma," Michael began, keeping his voice calm, "did your mom ever say where she got this bracelet? Did she talk about it?" Emma shook her head, her eyes wide and innocent. "No, but it's mine now. I like it." Michael forced a smile. "It's very beautiful, Emma. You should keep it safe." As Emma returned to her drawing, Michael's mind spiraled with fear and hope. He needed to learn more about her background, but it wouldn't be easy. The orphanage records might hold clues, but he had to tread carefully. Before leaving, Michael found Sister Margaret in her office, filling out paperwork. "Sister, could you tell me more about Emma's history? How did she come to be here?" Sister Margaret looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Emma was brought to us by social services a few months ago. Her mother passed away, and there was no other family to take her in. It's a tragic case. The poor child has been through so much." Michael's heart clenched. "Do you know where her mother passed away? Or if there were any belongings left behind?" The nun shook her head. "I'm afraid not. The details were sparse, but I can look into the files if you'd like. There might be something there, but I can't promise much." "Thank you, sister," Michael said, masking the urgency in his voice. "Anything you can find would be helpful." As he left the orphanage, Michael felt the weight of the mystery pressing on him. The bracelet was more than jewelry. It was a fragile link to Lily's past. But what it truly meant and where it would lead him remained unclear. For now, he knew one thing. He wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous it might be. Days turned into weeks, and Michael's visits to St. Gabriel's became more frequent. Each time, he spent hours with Emma, piecing together fragments of her past. He found himself drawn to her in a way that both comforted and terrified him. The bond between them grew stronger, but so did the obsession that had gripped him since discovering the bracelet. Emma seemed to brighten whenever Michael arrived, greeting him with a shy smile and eagerly showing him her latest drawings or sharing stories about her day. The other children noticed, and soon they began calling Michael Emma's doctor, a title that stirred something deep within him. It felt oddly fitting, even though he knew he needed to keep a professional boundary. One afternoon, as they sat together in the orphanage's small garden, Michael decided to bring up the topic that had been eating at him since their first meeting. The warm sunlight filtered through the trees, casting speckled shadows on the ground, while Emma plucked petals from a flower. "Emma," Michael began gently, "do you ever think about your family? About where you came from?" Emma looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and sadness. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I try not to think about it too much. It makes me sad." Michael nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know it can be hard, but if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here to listen. Maybe together, we can figure out more about your past." Emma's gaze dropped to the bracelet on her wrist. She traced the engraving with her finger, a habit Michael had noticed she did when deep in thought. "I wish I could remember more about my mom," she said softly. "I miss her, even though I don't remember much." Michael felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to tell Emma everything he suspected, to share the connection he believed they had. But he knew it was too soon, and the last thing he wanted was to scare her. Instead, he reached out and gently took her hand. "We'll find out more together, Emma. I promise." That evening, back at his home, Michael sat at his desk surrounded by papers. He had started his own investigation into Emma's background, searching through public records for any clues that could link her to Lily. It was a delicate operation. He couldn't risk raising suspicions, especially from the orphanage or social services. As he sifted through the information, one document caught his eye. It was a hospital report from a small town not far from Los Angeles, detailing the death of a woman who matched the vague description Sister Margaret had given him of Emma's mother. The cause of death was listed as a drug overdose. But what chilled Michael was the name on the file, Sarah Collins. It was the same name as one of Lily's childhood friends, someone who had vanished around the same time Lily disappeared. Michael's hands shook as he read further. Sarah had given birth to a child shortly before her death, a girl she named Emma. There was no mention of the father, and the child was placed in foster care before eventually being transferred to St. Gabriel's. Could it be that Sarah had taken Lily's bracelet and given it to her own daughter? Or was there something more sinister at play? The questions swirled in Michael's mind, each possibility more troubling than the last. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of uncovering something far darker than he had anticipated. The next day, Michael returned to the orphanage with renewed determination. Sister Margaret met him, handing him a thin file with a sympathetic smile. "I managed to find Emma's file," she said. "It's not much, but maybe it will help." Michael thanked her and opened the file, his heart pounding. Inside were sparse records, basic medical information, notes from social workers, and a brief history of Emma's placements before she arrived at St. Gabriel's. There was nothing about her mother's death or the circumstances leading up to it, just vague references to a troubled home life and multiple relocations. But there, tucked at the back of the file, was a small photograph. It was an old, faded picture of a young woman holding a baby, her face half turned away from the camera. The woman's hair was dark, and she wore a simple dress. Michael squinted, trying to make out the features. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, something that tugged at his memory. It wasn't until later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, that the realization struck him. The woman in the photograph, Sarah Collins, bore a striking resemblance to his late wife, Claire. The same Claire who had died in a car accident shortly after Lily's disappearance. The implications were staggering. Had Claire somehow been involved in Sarah's life after Lily was taken? Was it possible that the two women had crossed paths, and that Claire had known more than she had ever let on? Michael's mind raced with possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. He knew he had to keep digging, that the answers he sought were still out there, hidden beneath layers of lies and secrets. And he knew, without a doubt, that Emma was at the center of it all. Whatever the truth was, Michael was determined to uncover it. But as he fell into a restless sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous the path ahead would become. Michael Bennett's life began to revolve around two things: his work and the deepening mystery surrounding Emma. The more he dug into her past, the more he realized that something was terribly wrong. The initial shock of discovering the bracelet had only been the beginning. Now, as he unraveled the threads connecting Emma to his own lost family, he found himself stepping into a labyrinth of deception and hidden truths. One morning, after another sleepless night, filled with unanswered questions, Michael decided to visit the small town where Sarah Collins had died. It was a quiet place, far removed from the bustling streets of Los Angeles. As he drove through the town, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, as if the very air carried the weight of the secrets he was about to uncover. His first stop was the hospital where Sarah had passed away. The building was old and worn, its faded brick exterior reflecting the town's slow decay. Inside, the atmosphere was equally grim, with tired staff members moving through the halls with a weariness that spoke of long hours and thankless work. Michael approached the front desk, where a nurse looked up at him with a tired smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information on a patient who was here a few years ago," Michael said, trying to keep his tone casual. Her name was Sarah Collins. The nurse frowned, tapping a few keys on her computer. "That was a while back. We don't keep records for long, but I can check. After a few moments, she nodded. We do have a file, but it's pretty minimal. Do you want to see it? Michael's heart pounded as he nodded. The nurse disappeared into a back room, returning a few minutes later with a thin folder. Here it is, she said, handing it to him. But, like I said, there's not much in there. Michael took the file and found a quiet corner to sit down. The folder was indeed sparse. Just a few sheets of paper documenting Sarah's arrival, her condition upon admission, and the eventual cause of death. What stood out to him, though, was a note scribbled at the bottom of the page, almost as an afterthought. Asterisk, patient mentioned a daughter, Emma. No other family listed. Asterisk, there was nothing more, no indication of where Emma had been during that time or who had taken care of her. Michael's frustration grew as he realized he was still no closer to understanding how Emma had ended up with Lily's bracelet. Leaving the hospital, Michael decided to visit the local social services office, hoping to find more details about Emma's life after her mother's death. The office was small and cluttered, with stacks of paperwork filling every available surface. A woman behind the desk glanced up as he entered, her expression a mix of boredom and curiosity. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm looking for information on a girl named Emma Collins," Michael said, leaning on the counter. "She would have been in the system a few years ago." The woman sighed, pushing a pile of files aside as she accessed the computer. "Collins, you said? Emma Collins." She typed for a few moments, then shook her head. "Looks like her case was closed when she was placed in St. Gabriel's Orphanage. Before that, there were a few foster placements, but nothing stable. Can you tell me anything about those placements?" Michael pressed, his desperation growing. The woman hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure they were alone. "I'm not supposed to share details, but," she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "There were some irregularities with her case. One of her foster homes. Let's just say there were rumors of mistreatment, but nothing was ever proven. The family moved away shortly after Emma was removed from their care." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Where did they move to? The woman shook her head. "That information isn't in the system. It's like they vanished. And after that, Emma bounced around until she ended up at St. Gabriel's." Michael left the office with more questions than answers. Irregularities, mysterious foster homes, and families that disappeared. It all pointed to something much larger than he had anticipated. He couldn't shake the feeling that Emma had been caught in a web of corruption and deceit that ran deeper than he could imagine. That evening, back in Los Angeles, Michael sat in his study, staring at the files he had collected. He was certain now that Emma was somehow connected to Lily's disappearance, but the details were maddeningly elusive. As he reviewed the documents for the 100th time, his phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. It was a call from Sister Margaret. "Dr. Bennett, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. Someone came by the orphanage today, asking about Emma," she said, her voice filled with concern. Michael's grip tightened on the phone. Who was it? A man claiming to be from social services, but something didn't seem right. He wasn't very forthcoming with information, and when I asked for identification, he got defensive and left quickly. Michael's mind raced. Who was this man? And why was he suddenly interested in Emma? Was it possible that someone else was also searching for her? Someone who knew more about her past than he did? "Thank you for letting me know, sister," Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady. Did he say anything about why he was there? Only that he needed to verify some details for their records. But it didn't feel like a routine visit. After hanging up, Michael felt a sense of urgency like never before. If someone else was looking for Emma, it meant that time was running out. He needed to protect her. But more than that, he needed to find out the truth before it was too late. The following day, Michael made arrangements to meet with a private investigator. He couldn't do this alone anymore. He needed help. As he sat in a dimly lit cafe, waiting for the investigator to arrive, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting closer to something dangerous, something that had been buried for years. When the investigator finally arrived, a grizzled man with sharp eyes and an air of quiet confidence, Michael wasted no time explaining the situation. "I need you to find out everything you can about Emma Collins, her mother Sarah, and anyone connected to them. There's something going on, something that doesn't add up." The investigator listened carefully, nodding as Michael spoke. "I'll take the case," he said finally. "But you should know, sometimes when you start digging, you find things you wish you hadn't." Michael met the man's gaze, his resolve unwavering. "I don't care what it takes. I need to know the truth." As he left the cafe, Michael felt a sense of grim determination settle over him. He was in too deep to turn back now. The secrets he was uncovering were dark and twisted, and he knew they would only lead to more pain. But he couldn't stop, not when there was still a chance to find out what had happened to his daughter, and to protect Emma from the same fate. Whatever lay ahead, Michael knew he had to face it head on. There was no turning back. As the days passed, Michael Bennett's investigation began to take on a life of its own. He had barely slept or eaten, consumed by the need to uncover the truth. The private investigator, who introduced himself as Victor Lane, proved to be as relentless as Michael in pursuing the truth. The more they dug, the more dangerous the connections became. It started with a simple lead. Victor traced a mysterious man who had visited the orphanage to a government database that linked him to a private security firm known for its ties to powerful and wealthy individuals. The firm was notorious for its involvement in shady dealings, including covering up scandals for influential clients. The discovery sent a shiver down Michael's spine. Why would such a firm be interested in Emma, a little girl with no family and no apparent ties to wealth or power? The answer, Victor suggested, might lie in Emma's past or perhaps in Michael's own. The more Michael thought about it, the more he began to suspect that Emma was not just connected to his missing daughter, but to something much bigger, something that had remained hidden for years. One night, as Michael sat in his dimly lit study, the phone rang. He picked it up quickly, expecting it to be Victor with another lead. But instead, he heard a voice that sent a cold wave of fear through him. "Dr. Bennett," the voice said, calm and deliberate, "I believe you've been asking questions about Emma Collins. I suggest you stop." Michael's heart pounded. Who is this? That's not important. What's important is that you're meddling in affairs you don't understand. For your sake, and for the girls, drop this investigation. Michael gripped the phone tightly, his mind racing. "What do you want with Emma? Who are you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Consider this a warning, Dr. Bennett. Walk away, or there will be consequences." The line went dead, leaving Michael staring at the receiver, his heart racing. The call confirmed his worst fears. Someone was watching him, and they were serious about keeping whatever secrets Emma was connected to buried. The next morning, Michael met Victor at a secluded park, far from prying eyes. He recounted the threatening phone call, his voice edged with the fear that had settled deep in his bones. Victor listened, his expression grim. "This is getting dangerous, Michael. Whoever these people are, they're not just going to back down. They've got resources, and they're clearly willing to use them to protect whatever they're hiding." Michael nodded, knowing Victor was right, but unable to walk away. "I can't stop now. Emma is in danger, and so is the truth about my daughter. I need to know what's really going on." Victor sighed, his eyes narrowing as he considered their next move. "All right, but we need to be smart about this. If they know we're digging, we have to assume they're watching us closely." They decided to continue their investigation, but with more caution. Victor would dig into the security firm and their clients, while Michael would focus on Emma's connections. They agreed to meet only in safe, secluded places, and to communicate through encrypted channels to avoid detection. But as careful as they were, the noose around them seemed to tighten. One evening, as Michael returned home, he noticed a black car parked near his house. It was the same car he had seen a few times before, always lingering just out of sight. His paranoia spiked. He knew he was being watched, but he couldn't prove it. Not yet. Inside his home, Michael found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, double-checking locks, and listening for any signs of intrusion. The sense of security he once had was gone, replaced by a growing fear that at any moment, everything could come crashing down. One day, while reviewing old files in his study, he received a frantic call from Sister Margaret. "Dr. Bennett, something's wrong. Emma is gone." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. "What do you mean she's gone?" "She disappeared this morning," Sister Margaret replied, her voice trembling. "She was here during breakfast, and then she wasn't. We've searched everywhere, but there's no sign of her. I'm scared something terrible has happened." Panic surged through Michael. He knew this was no coincidence. Whoever had threatened him must have made good on their warning. Emma was in danger, and it was his fault. Without wasting a second, Michael grabbed his keys and rushed out of the house. He called Victor on the way, filling him in on the situation. "They've taken her, Victor. They've taken Emma." Victor's voice was calm but tense. "Stay focused, Michael. We'll get her back. Meet me at the orphanage. We'll start there." When Michael arrived at St. Gabriel's, the atmosphere was chaotic. The children were being kept inside, and the staff was frantically searching the grounds. Michael found Sister Margaret pacing near the entrance, her face pale with worry. "Have you found anything?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Nothing. It's like she just vanished. I don't understand how this could have happened." Michael clenched his fists, rage and fear battling for control. "I'm going to find her," Michael said, more to himself than to Sister Margaret. "I won't let them hurt her." As Victor arrived, the two men began their own investigation, combing through the orphanage and the surrounding area for any clues. But there was nothing. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no trace of where Emma might have been taken. Michael's mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Was she still alive? Was she being held somewhere, scared and alone? The thought was unbearable. Later that night, after hours of searching, Michael sat in his car, exhausted and defeated. He had failed her, just as he had failed Lily. But as he sat there, a thought began to form. Emma was still connected to something bigger than either of them. If he could find out what that was, he might be able to find her. The only lead they had was the security firm, the same firm connected to the man who had visited the orphanage. Victor agreed to dig deeper, to find out who was behind it and what their connection to Emma might be. Days passed with no word from Emma or her captors. Michael was on edge, his nerves frayed and his patience thin. He knew time was running out. But then, just as he was about to lose hope, Victor called with a breakthrough. "I found something, Michael," Victor said, his voice urgent. "The security firm is tied to a major pharmaceutical company, Luminex. They've been involved in some pretty shady experiments, and there's a paper trail that suggests they've been covering up illegal drug trials on children. Emma might have been one of their test subjects." The revelation hit Michael like a sledgehammer. This was bigger than he had imagined. Emma wasn't just a lost child. She was the key to exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power. And now, the people behind it were doing everything they could to keep it buried. "We need to move fast," Victor continued. "If they realize we're onto them, they'll disappear and we'll never find her." Michael felt a surge of determination. Then let's expose them. Let's bring them down. With renewed purpose, Michael and Victor began planning their next move. They would take their evidence to the authorities, to the media, to anyone who would listen. But they knew the risks. The people they were up against wouldn't hesitate to silence them if they got too close. As they prepared to take on the powerful forces behind Luminex, Michael couldn't shake the fear that he was walking into a trap. But he had no choice. Emma's life was on the line. And so was the truth about what had happened to Lily. Whatever it took, Michael was ready to fight. He was ready to face the dangerous connections that had ensnared them both. Michael Bennett's life had become a chaotic whirlwind of fear, anger, and determination. The revelation that Emma might have been subjected to illegal drug trials by Luminex Pharmaceuticals had shaken him to his core. The idea that his missing daughter, Lily, could somehow be connected to this conspiracy haunted him day and night. As he and Victor Lane prepared to expose the truth, Michael knew that time was running out, not just for Emma, but for himself as well. The morning after Victor's breakthrough, Michael received an unexpected call. It was from Claire's sister, Rachel, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Her voice was filled with an urgency that immediately set Michael on edge. "Michael, we need to talk," Rachel said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "It's about Lily and Claire." The mention of his wife's name was like a punch to the gut. Claire had been gone for years, her death in a car accident, a painful chapter in Michael's life. But hearing her name now, in the context of everything else he had uncovered, felt like opening an old wound. "Rachel, what is this about?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just meet me," she insisted, giving him the address of a small cafe in a secluded part of town. "There are things you need to know, things Claire never told you." Michael agreed, his mind spinning with possibilities. Could Claire have been involved in whatever had happened to Lily? Had she known more than she had let on? The thought was unbearable, but Michael couldn't ignore it. He needed answers, no matter how painful they might be. When he arrived at the cafe, Rachel was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. She looked up as he approached, her face drawn and tense. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly as he sat down across from her. "Just tell me what this is about, Rachel," Michael replied, his voice tight with anticipation. Rachel took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Michael, before Claire died, she was involved in something dangerous. I didn't know the details at the time, but after Lily disappeared, Claire became obsessed with finding her. She believed that Lily had been taken, not by some random kidnapper, but by people connected to her work." Michael's heart pounded in his chest. Her work? Claire was a nurse. What could she possibly have been involved in? "She wasn't just a nurse," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "She was working on the side for a private research firm, a firm connected to Luminex. I didn't know about it until after she died, but I found some of her notes. She was investigating something related to those drug trials, and she believed that Lily was taken because of what she knew." Michael felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't know what to do," Rachel exclaimed, tears filling her eyes. "I was scared, Michael, and after Claire died, I thought it was over. But then I started seeing things, people watching me, strange calls. I realized that whoever took Lily wasn't done. They were still out there, and they didn't want anyone to know the truth. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but they formed a picture that was more horrifying than Michael had imagined. His wife had been involved in a dangerous conspiracy, one that had cost her their daughter and maybe even her own life. "Why are you telling me this now?" Michael asked, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "Because I'm scared, Michael," Rachel admitted, her voice breaking. "I think they're coming after me now. And after everything I've heard about Emma, I think they might be connected. You need to know the truth before it's too late." Michael sat back in his chair, reeling from the information. Claire had known something that had put her in danger. And now, years later, that same danger was closing in on him and Emma. The bitter truth was that he had been blind to the risks, to the secrets Claire had kept. And now those secrets were threatening to destroy everything he had left. As he left the cafe, Michael called Victor, his mind racing. "Victor, I need you to dig deeper into Claire's past. She was involved with Luminex. She knew something about their drug trials. And I think that's why Lily was taken." Victor didn't hesitate. "I'll start right away. But, Michael, if this is true, you need to be prepared for what we might find. This could get very ugly." Michael hung up, a sense of dread settling over him. He knew Victor was right. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. But there was no turning back now. The truth about Claire and Lily was within reach, and Michael was willing to risk everything to uncover it. That night, Michael returned home to find an envelope slipped under his front door. There was no return address, no markings to indicate who had sent it. He opened it cautiously, his hands shaking. Inside, he found a single photograph. It was a picture of Emma, taken recently, too recently. She was sitting in what looked like a medical facility, her expression fearful and confused. Michael's blood ran cold. The message was clear. They had Emma, and they were watching him closely. The phone rang just as he was processing what he had seen. He answered it with a sense of foreboding, already knowing who would be on the other end. Dr. Bennett, the same calm voice from before, said, "You've been very busy. We warned you to stop digging. Now it's too late. Where is Emma?" Michael demanded, his voice shaking with fear and anger. "She's safe for now," the voice replied, chillingly casual. "But that could change. You see, you're not the only one with something to lose. You have a choice to make, Dr. Bennett," the voice said coldly. "Either walk away and never look back, or keep going and lose everything." The line went dead, leaving Michael in a state of shock. They had Emma, and they were using her as leverage. The stakes had never been higher, and the choices had never been more difficult. The next morning, Michael met Victor again, this time at his office. He handed Victor the photograph, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "They have her, Victor. We have to get her back." Victor examined the photo, his expression grim. "This changes things. We need to be very careful from here on out. If we make the wrong move, they could disappear with her and we'll never find her." Michael nodded, knowing the gravity of the situation. "But we can't stop. We're so close to the truth. We just have to find the right leverage, something that will force them to let her go." The two men spent the rest of the day planning their next move, knowing that every second counted. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Emma was at the center of something much larger than they had anticipated, something that had already claimed the lives of others and could very well claim theirs too. As night fell, Michael sat alone in his study, the photograph of Emma on the desk in front of him. He thought about Claire, about Lily, and about the lies that had led him to this point. The revelations were bitter, each one more painful than the last. But they had also given him clarity. There was no turning back now. Michael made a silent vow to himself. He would save Emma, and he would expose the people responsible for this nightmare. Whatever it took, he would bring them down. Because now, it wasn't just about finding his daughter. It was about justice for all the children who had been hurt, and for the woman he had loved and lost. With that resolve burning inside him, Michael prepared for the battle ahead. The truth was within reach, but the cost of uncovering it would be higher than he had ever imagined. Michael Bennett's world had narrowed to a singular purpose: finding Emma and bringing down the people responsible for her abduction and whatever horrors lay behind it. The stakes were impossibly high, and each passing day felt like an eternity. The fear that he might never see Emma alive again gnawed at him, but it only fueled his determination. He had to press forward, no matter the cost. Victor Lane, ever resourceful, had begun unraveling the tangled web of connections between Luminex Pharmaceuticals and the shadowy figures who seemed to be pulling the strings. Through his contacts, Victor managed to obtain records and confidential documents that painted a damning picture of the company's activities. Illegal drug trials, human experimentation, and a vast network of paid-off officials who kept it all under wraps. It was worse than they had imagined, and Emma was caught in the middle of it. But despite their progress, one question remained. Where was Emma being held? They needed to find her before it was too late, and time was running out. One night, while Michael was poring over the latest documents Victor had uncovered, he received an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line simply read, "Do you want to save her?" Michael's heart pounded as he opened the message. It contained a single line of text. "Asterisk if you want to save Emma. Come alone to the address below. No police. No backup. Just you. You have 24 hours. Asterisk, the address was for an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a place known for its desolation. It was the kind of place where people went when they didn't want to be found. Michael immediately called Victor, who answered on the first ring. "I got an email," Michael said, his voice tense. "They want me to meet them at an industrial site. Alone." "Michael, it's a trap," Victor said, his voice firm. "They're baiting you. If you go there alone, you're putting yourself and Emma in even more danger." "I know," Michael replied, his mind racing. "But I don't have a choice. They have her, and this might be our only chance to get her back." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Victor spoke again. "Then we do this smart. You won't go in alone. Not really. I'll be nearby, ready to step in if anything goes wrong." Michael nodded, his resolve hardening. "Let's do it." The next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael drove to the industrial complex, his heart pounding in his chest. The sprawling site was a maze of crumbling buildings and rusted machinery, a perfect place for something sinister to unfold. He parked his car at the entrance, scanning the area for any signs of movement, but the place seemed eerily quiet. Victor had positioned himself a few blocks away, ready to move in at a moment's notice. They had agreed on a plan. Michael would wear a concealed microphone, allowing Victor to hear everything that happened. If things went south, Victor would call on his own backup and storm the site. As Michael approached the designated building, a massive, dilapidated structure that loomed like a dark sentinel, his nerves were on edge. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the old metal made his heart skip a beat. He knew this could very well be the end for him. And for Emma. He entered the building through a large, rusted door that groaned in protest as it swung open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay, and the only light came from a few scatter beams filtering through the broken windows. Michael moved cautiously, his senses heightened, his every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he pressed on. Deeper into the building, he finally saw them. Two men standing in the center of a vast, empty room. One was tall and muscular, dressed in a black suit that seemed out of place in the dilapidated surroundings. The other was shorter, with a lean, predatory look about him. Neither man smiled as Michael approached. "You must be Dr. Bennett," the taller man said, his voice as cold as his eyes. "Where's Emma?" Michael demanded, his voice betraying none of the fear gnawing at him. "She's safe for now," the shorter man replied, his lips curling into a thin, cruel smile. "But that depends on you." Michael's eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of Emma. "I want to see her," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "All in good time," the tall man said, his tone mocking. "But first, let's talk about what you're going to do for us." Michael clenched his fists, barely containing his rage. "What do you want?" "You're going to stop your little investigation," the shorter man said, taking a step closer. "You're going to destroy all the evidence you collected. Forget about Luminex and walk away. If you do that, you might just get the girl back." "And if I don't?" Michael asked, already knowing the answer. The taller man's smile was icy. "Then you'll never see her again, and neither will anyone else." Michael's heart pounded in his chest. He had expected threats, but hearing them laid out so coldly made his blood run cold. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You think I'm going to let you get away with what you've done?" The shorter man laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed in the empty room. "You're in no position to make threats, Dr. Bennett. We hold all the cards. But you can decide how this ends." Michael stared at the men, his mind racing. He knew Victor was listening, ready to step in. But this situation was more precarious than either of them had anticipated. If they made a move too soon, it could cost Emma her life. Then, from the shadows, he heard a sound, a faint whimper. He turned his head slightly and saw her. Emma was sitting on the floor, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. She was alive, but barely. The sight of her in such a state tore at Michael's heart, fueling his desperation. He had to make a choice, and quickly. If he agreed to their demands, he might lose any chance of bringing down Luminex. But if he refused, Emma would pay the price. In that moment, everything became clear. Michael knew what he had to do, even if it meant risking everything. "All right," Michael said slowly, his voice calm but firm. "I'll do what you want. I'll stop the investigation." The shorter man's smile widened. "Good. You made the right choice." Michael nodded, trying to appear defeated. "But I want Emma now. I want to see that she's unharmed before I do anything." The taller man hesitated, glancing at his companion. "We can't let her go until we have proof you stopped." "Then let me take her out of here," Michael countered, his voice steady. "You can hold on to me until I prove I've destroyed everything." The two men exchanged a glance, clearly weighing their options. Michael knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he had no other choice. He had to get Emma out of there, no matter the cost. Finally, the taller man nodded. "All right, take the girl. But if you try anything, we'll hunt you down and you'll both disappear. Understand?" Michael nodded, relief flooding through him. "I understand." The shorter man walked over to Emma, roughly pulling her to her feet. He cut the ropes binding her hands, and she stumbled toward Michael, her eyes filled with fear and confusion. He caught her as she fell into his arms, holding her tightly. "It's okay, Emma," he whispered, trying to reassure her. "I'm here now. You're safe." As they turned to leave, the taller man's voice stopped them. "Remember, Dr. Bennett, we're watching you. One wrong move and it's over." Michael didn't respond. He just held Emma close and led her out of the building, his mind racing with plans for what came next. As soon as they were clear, he would signal Victor, and they would make their move. But as they stepped out into the cool night air, Michael felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The men behind Luminex were ruthless, and they wouldn't let them go so easily. As they reached the car, Michael whispered to Emma, "We're going to get out of this, Emma. I promise." But even as he said the words, doubt gnawed at him. The road ahead was filled with danger, and the odds were stacked against them. But he knew one thing for sure. He would fight to his last breath to protect Emma and bring the people responsible for this nightmare to justice. And as they drove away from the industrial complex, Michael made a silent vow. This would end one way or another. He would see to it that the truth came out, no matter what the cost. The escape from the industrial complex should have felt like a victory. But as Michael Bennett drove through the darkened streets of Los Angeles, with Emma curled up in the passenger seat, it felt more like a temporary reprieve. The weight of what he had promised hung heavy in the air. He had bought them time, but the danger was far from over. Emma was exhausted, her small frame trembling with the aftershocks of fear. Michael reached over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're going somewhere safe," he said softly, trying to mask the uncertainty in his voice. Emma nodded, too tired and traumatized to ask questions. She trusted Michael completely, but he could see the toll this ordeal had taken on her. She was a child, caught in a nightmare she didn't fully understand. As they neared the safe house that Victor had arranged, Michael's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Victor, who had been monitoring the situation closely from a distance. Asterisk got eyes on them. "You did good. We're ready for the next move." Asterisk Michael pulled into the driveway of a nondescript suburban home. It was quiet, almost eerily so, the kind of place that would be easy to overlook, perfect for hiding, at least for a little while. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but comfortable. Michael guided Emma to a small bedroom where she could finally rest. She looked up at him with wide, scared eyes. "Are they going to find us?" she whispered. Michael knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not here," he reassured her. "You're safe now, Emma. I promise." But even as he spoke the words, doubt gnawed at him. The men they were up against had resources far beyond anything he and Victor could muster. They were playing a dangerous game, and Michael knew that every decision he made could have life-or-death consequences. After Emma was settled, Michael joined Victor in the small living room. The investigator was already at work, his laptop open and documents spread out across the coffee table. "They bought your story," Victor said, not looking up, "at least for now. But they'll be watching, waiting for you to destroy the evidence." Michael nodded, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Victor replied, his tone grim. "They'll be expecting confirmation soon. We need to act quickly, before they realize we're not going to play by their rules." Michael knew what that meant. They needed to expose Luminex and its crimes before the men behind the company had a chance to strike back. But doing so would require careful planning, and more importantly, making the right choices at the right moments. One wrong move, and they could lose everything. "We need to get the evidence out there," Michael said, pacing the room. "But if we go public too soon, they'll know we're bluffing and come after us with everything they've got. We have to time this perfectly." Victor leaned back, studying Michael. "I've got a contact at a major news outlet, someone I trust. We can pass the information to them, but we need to be smart about it. We have to make sure the story gets out in a way that can't be suppressed. Once it's out there, it'll be too big for them to cover up." Michael stopped pacing and looked at Victor, determination hardening his features. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll leak the information strategically, making sure it reaches the right people. But we need to be ready for their response. They're not going to go down without a fight." As they finalized their plan, the gravity of what they were about to do settled over them like a heavy fog. Exposing Luminex would undoubtedly bring the full force of its powerful backers crashing down on them. Michael knew they were putting themselves in incredible danger, but he couldn't let fear stop him now. Too many lives were at stake. Emma's, Lily's, and countless others who had been victims of the company's cruel experiments. The next morning, Michael woke to the sound of Emma stirring in the next room. He found her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window. Her small frame looked so fragile, and yet there was a resilience in her eyes that reminded him of Lily. "Hey," he said softly, stepping into the room. "How are you feeling?" Emma looked up at him, her expression somber. "Better, I think, but I'm still scared." Michael sat beside her, placing a comforting arm around her shoulders. "I know, and it's okay to be scared, but I promise we're going to get through this together." She leaned into him, finding some comfort in his words. "Will they come after us again?" Michael hesitated, not wanting to lie to her. "They might," he admitted, "but we're going to do everything we can to stop them. And we're not alone. Victor and I are working to make sure the truth comes out, so they can't hurt anyone else." Emma nodded, trusting him completely. "What about my mom? Do you think she knew about all of this?" The question hit Michael hard. The truth was, he didn't know how much Sarah had known, or if she had been a victim of Luminex's schemes herself. But he didn't want to burden Emma with those uncertainties. "Your mom loved you very much," he said, choosing his words carefully. "She would have done anything to protect you, and I'm sure she would be proud of how brave you've been." Emma's eyes welled with tears, but she nodded, accepting his reassurance. "I miss her." "I know," Michael whispered, his heart breaking for her. "But you're not alone, Emma. I'm here for you, and I'm not going anywhere." Later that day, Michael and Victor set their plan into motion. They prepared the evidence they had gathered, documents, photos, testimony from former employees, and packaged it in a way that would be impossible to ignore. Victor's contact at the news outlet agreed to run the story as soon as they had it, with a promise of full coverage across multiple platforms. But as they worked, the reality of their situation loomed ever larger. They were up against powerful, ruthless people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And even with their plan in place, there were no guarantees. They could be walking into a trap, or worse, setting one for themselves. The final piece of the puzzle was getting the evidence to the journalist without being detected. Victor arranged a meeting at a location where they would hand off the information. But as the time approached, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "We need to be careful," he warned Victor as they prepared to leave the safe house. "I don't trust that they're just going to let us walk away from this." Victor nodded. "We'll take every precaution. But remember, once this story is out, they won't be able to silence us without drawing more attention to themselves. The key is getting the evidence to the right people, and fast." Michael agreed, but the knot of anxiety in his chest wouldn't ease. They were walking a tightrope, and one slip could mean disaster. As they drove to the meeting spot, a secluded parking garage in the heart of the city, Michael kept a wary eye on their surroundings. Every car, every pedestrian seemed like a potential threat. His nerves were on edge, and he could tell Victor was feeling the same. When they arrived, the garage was empty, save for a single car parked in a shadowed corner. The journalist stepped out, a tall, thin man with sharp features and a nervous energy about him. He approached Victor and Michael, glancing around as if expecting someone to jump out at any moment. "You have the files?" the journalist asked, his voice low. Victor handed over a flash drive containing all the incriminating evidence. "It's all here. Make sure it gets out quickly and widely. The people behind this won't hesitate to try to bury it." The journalist nodded, pocketing the drive. "Don't worry. This story is too big to suppress. They'll have the whole world watching them by the time we're done." But as they turned to leave, a sense of dread washed over Michael. Something didn't feel right. Before he could voice his concern, the sound of screeching tires echoed through the garage. 3 black SUVs roared into view, surrounding them with terrifying precision. "Get down!" Victor shouted, but it was too late. Armed men poured out of the vehicles, guns trained on them. "Hand over the girl and the files." One of the men barked. "Do it now and no one gets hurt." Michael's mind raced. They had walked straight into a trap. The journalist, looking panicked, tried to back away, but one of the men grabbed him, forcing him to the ground. "Please don't hurt her," Michael pleaded, knowing they had no real leverage. "She's just a child." The man in charge sneered. "We're not here to negotiate. Hand over the girl or you're all dead." Michael glanced at Victor, who gave him a barely perceptible nod. They had one last chance. If Victor could create a distraction, Michael might be able to get Emma to safety. But it was a long shot, and they both knew it. Before Michael could react, Victor lunged at the nearest man, knocking the gun from his hand. Chaos erupted as gunfire rang out, echoing through the concrete structure. Michael grabbed Emma and ran, ducking behind cars as bullets ricocheted around them. But as they neared the exit, Michael felt a searing pain in his side. He stumbled, his vision blurring, but he refused to let go of Emma. "Keep running," he urged her, his voice weak. "Michael, no," Emma cried, trying to pull him up. But Michael knew he was fading fast. He had to get her out of there, no matter what. Summoning the last of his strength, Michael pushed Emma toward the exit. "Go," he shouted. "I'll be right behind you." Emma hesitated, tears streaming down her face. But she finally obeyed, sprinting toward the exit. Michael tried to follow, but his legs gave out, and he collapsed to the ground, as darkness closed in around him. The last thing Michael saw was Emma disappearing into the night, her small figure vanishing into the safety of the city beyond. He prayed that she would make it, that Victor's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. And then everything went black. The world returned to Michael Bennett in fragments. Blurry shapes, muffled sounds, and a dull, throbbing pain that pulsed through his body. He struggled to open his eyes, the effort feeling like lifting the weight of the world. When his vision finally cleared, he found himself in a sterile, dimly lit room. The sharp scent of antiseptic hung in the air, and the steady beep of a heart monitor punctuated the silence. Michael blinked, trying to piece together where he was and how he had gotten there. His last memory was of pushing Emma to safety, telling her to run. Everything after that was a haze of pain and darkness. "Welcome back, Dr. Bennett," a voice said from somewhere in the room. It was cold, clinical, and devoid of any emotion. Michael turned his head slowly, grimacing at the pain that flared in his side. A man in a white lab coat stood by the door, his face shadowed by the dim light. Michael didn't recognize him, but the expression on the man's face was unmistakable. He was in control, and he knew it. "Where am I?" Michael croaked, his throat dry and voice weak. "You're in a secure facility," the man replied, stepping closer. "You've been unconscious for a while, but you're stable now. Unfortunately, your situation is complicated." Michael's mind raced, the fog of pain and medication slowly lifting. "Emma, where is she?" he demanded, the urgency in his voice cutting through his weakness. The man sighed, as if Michael's concern was a minor inconvenience. "The girl is safe for now, but you should be more concerned about yourself. You're in quite a bit of trouble, Dr. Bennett." Michael's eyes narrowed as he tried to read the man's expression. "Who are you?" "Let's just say I represent the interests of those who have been watching you," the man said, his tone casual. "You've caused a lot of problems, Dr. Bennett, and the people I work for don't appreciate problems." Michael's mind flashed back to the events that had led him here. The investigation into Luminex, the dangerous connections they had uncovered, and the trap that had nearly cost him and Emma their lives. The realization hit him like a cold wave. He was in the hands of the enemy. "You won't get away with this," Michael said, his voice stronger now, fueled by anger. "The truth is out there. People know what you've done." The man chuckled, a sound devoid of any real amusement. "You're in no position to make threats. The truth, as you call it, is a malleable thing. It can be shaped, controlled, even buried, depending on who holds the power. And right now, Dr. Bennett, we hold the power." Michael's stomach twisted. He had risked everything to expose Luminex, but now it seemed they were one step ahead, manipulating the situation to their advantage. He had to find a way out, to get back to Emma, to ensure that the truth wasn't buried along with him. "What do you want?" Michael asked, trying to buy time, to think of a way to turn the situation around. The man's expression darkened, the coldness in his eyes intensifying. "We want you to stop. All of this, your investigation, your pursuit of the truth, it ends now. You will sign a statement retracting everything, declaring that your findings were baseless and that you acted out of personal grief and desperation. In exchange, we might consider letting you and the girl live." Michael's blood ran cold. The choice they were offering him was no choice at all. Lie to protect himself and Emma, or refuse and condemn them both to death. But as tempting as it was to take the offer and ensure Emma's safety, he knew he couldn't do it. He couldn't let these people win. Couldn't let them continue their monstrous work unchecked. "Go to hell," Michael spat, the fire in his eyes matching the fury in his voice. "I won't be your pawn." The man's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps disappointment, or perhaps anticipation of what would come next. "You're making a mistake, Dr. Bennett. A mistake that will cost you dearly." Before Michael could respond, the door to the room swung open, and two armed guards entered. The man in the lab coat nodded to them, and they moved toward Michael with practiced efficiency. "Take him back to his cell," the man ordered. "We'll give him time to reconsider." As the guards approached, Michael braced himself for a fight, but his body was still too weak to resist. They grabbed him roughly, dragging him out of the room and down a long, sterile hallway. Every step sent waves of pain through his body, but Michael forced himself to stay conscious, to take in every detail, every possible exit. They led him to a small, windowless cell and shoved him inside. The door slammed shut behind him with a heavy clang, and the sound of the lock turning echoed in the silence. Michael staggered to his feet, his vision swimming, but he refused to give in to the despair threatening to overwhelm him. As he collapsed onto the small cot in the corner, Michael's thoughts turned to Emma. She was still out there, somewhere, and as long as he was alive, there was hope. He had to find a way to reach her, to protect her from the monsters who had taken her, and he had to find a way to get the truth out, no matter what the cost. The hours dragged on, each one filled with a gnawing sense of urgency. Michael knew time was running out, but he refused to let himself fall into despair. He focused on the one thing that had kept him going all these years, the memory of his daughter, Lily, and the promise he had made to find her. That promise had led him to Emma, and now it was leading him into the fight of his life. Just as he was beginning to lose hope, the door to his cell creaked open. Michael tensed, expecting the guards or the man in the lab coat to return. But instead, a familiar figure stepped inside. Victor, looking battered but determined. "Michael," Victor whispered urgently, moving quickly to his side. "We don't have much time." "Victor," Michael breathed, relief flooding through him. "How did you—" "No time to explain," Victor interrupted, helping Michael to his feet. "I've got a way out, but we have to move now." Michael nodded, ignoring the pain that flared in his side as he followed Victor out of the cell. They moved quickly and quietly through the labyrinthine facility, Victor guiding him with practiced precision. Michael could hear the distant echoes of voices and footsteps, but Victor seemed to know exactly where to go to avoid detection. Finally, they reached a small service exit, and Victor pushed the door open, revealing a narrow alley bathed in the dim light of dawn. Michael took a deep breath of the cool, fresh air, feeling a surge of hope. "We're not out of the woods yet," Victor cautioned, before leading Michael toward a waiting car. "But I've got a plan. We're going to expose Luminex and get Emma back, once and for all." As they sped away from the facility, Michael turned to Victor, his voice filled with determination. "What's the plan?" "We're going to hit them where it hurts," Victor replied, his eyes steely with resolve. "We're going to release the evidence, all of it, to the public. No filters, no gatekeepers. We'll make sure everyone knows what Luminex has done. Once it's out there, they won't be able to hide behind their money and power. The whole world will see them for what they are." Michael nodded, the fire in his heart rekindled. "And Emma? Where is she?" Victor's expression softened. "I've got a lead on where they're holding her. It's risky, but we're going to get her back." As they drove through the quiet streets, Michael felt a sense of clarity wash over him. The choice before him was stark but simple. He would fight with everything he had to bring Luminex down, to save Emma, and to finally uncover the truth about Lily. There was no room for doubt, no room for fear, only the unwavering determination to see this through to the end. The truth was within reach, and Michael knew that once it was revealed, there would be no going back. But he also knew that he was ready to face whatever came next, ready to fight for justice, and ready to protect the innocent lives that had been caught in this web of deceit. As the first light of dawn began to break over the city, Michael felt the weight of his choices, but he also felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle wasn't over yet, but the final confrontation was drawing near. And Michael Bennett was ready. The final confrontation was inevitable. As Victor Lane's car weaved through the early morning traffic, Michael Bennett felt the weight of everything they had uncovered pressing down on him. The truth was a powerful weapon, but it was also a dangerous one, capable of destroying lives, both innocent and guilty. The choice he had made was clear. He would expose Luminex, save Emma, and finally learn what had happened to his daughter, Lily. But the path ahead was fraught with danger, and the outcome was far from certain. Victor's plan was as audacious as it was risky. They would broadcast the evidence live to the world, using a secure, untraceable connection to ensure that the information couldn't be suppressed. The files they had gathered, documents, photographs, videos, would be released simultaneously to news outlets, social media platforms, and watchdog organizations. Once the truth was out, Luminex and its powerful allies would have no way to cover it up. But first, they had to get Emma back. "We've got a location on where they're holding her," Victor said, glancing at Michael as they sped toward their destination. "It's a private estate outside the city, heavily guarded. They think they're untouchable there, but they're wrong." Michael nodded, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had come too far to turn back now. "What's the plan?" "We go in quietly," Victor replied, his voice steady. "We take out the guards, get Emma, and then we go live. Once the world sees what Luminex has done, they won't be able to hide. And if we're lucky, we might even find some answers about Lily." The mention of his daughter's name sent a fresh wave of determination through Michael. This was his last chance to find the truth, to uncover the fate of the little girl who had been taken from him so many years ago. He couldn't afford to fail, not now. As they approached the estate, Victor pulled the car off the road, parking it in a secluded spot hidden from view. The estate loomed in the distance, a sprawling mansion surrounded by high walls and guarded by security teams. Michael could see the cold, calculated precision with which the estate had been fortified, a testament to the power and wealth of those who controlled it. "We're going to have to be fast and precise," Victor said, handing Michael a small earpiece and a pistol. "We can't afford any mistakes. Once we're inside, we head straight for Emma. No distractions." Michael nodded, slipping the earpiece into his ear and gripping the pistol tightly. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a father, one who was ready to do whatever it took to protect his child, even if that child wasn't his own. They moved swiftly through the shadows, using the cover of darkness to their advantage. Victor disabled the security cameras with a handheld device, and they slipped through a gap in the fence, moving silently toward the mansion. Every sound, every rustle of the leaves set Michael's nerves on edge, but he forced himself to stay focused. As they approached the back entrance, Victor signaled for Michael to stop. He pointed to two guards standing near the door, their rifles slung over their shoulders. Victor motioned for Michael to follow his lead, and together they moved in. The takedown was quick and silent. Victor incapacitated one guard with a swift blow to the back of the head, while Michael, his adrenaline pumping, managed to disarm the other before knocking him unconscious. They dragged the bodies out of sight and continued inside. The mansion was a maze of corridors and rooms, but Victor seemed to know exactly where to go. They encountered several more guards along the way, but each one was swiftly and quietly dealt with. Michael's heart raced as they neared the room where Victor believed Emma was being held. Finally, they reached a heavy, reinforced door at the end of a narrow hallway. Victor quickly picked the lock, and the door swung open with a creak. Inside, the room was dimly lit, but Michael's eyes immediately locked onto the small figure huddled in the corner. "Emma," Michael whispered, rushing to her side. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear and relief. "Michael," she cried, throwing her arms around him. He held her tightly, the overwhelming relief of finding her safe washing over him like a tidal wave. "It's okay, Emma," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here. We're getting out of here." But before they could move, the door behind them slammed shut, and the sound of heavy footsteps filled the hallway outside. Michael spun around, his gun raised, just as the door burst open, revealing a group of armed men led by the same man in the lab coat who had interrogated him earlier. "Well, well," the man sneered, stepping into the room. "You didn't really think it would be that easy, did you?" Michael stood protectively in front of Emma, his grip tightening on the pistol. "Let her go," he demanded, his voice filled with determination. The man in the lab coat laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You're in no position to make demands, Dr. Bennett, but I'll give you one last chance. Hand over the girl and the evidence, and you might just walk out of here alive." Michael's mind raced. He knew he couldn't trust this man, couldn't trust any deal they offered. But they were outnumbered, and Emma's life hung in the balance. Victor, sensing the tension, slowly lowered his weapon, his eyes meeting Michael's. "It's not over yet," he whispered. Before Michael could respond, Victor suddenly moved, throwing himself at the nearest guard. The room erupted into chaos as gunfire rang out, and Michael grabbed Emma, shielding her as they ducked behind a heavy piece of furniture. The fight was brutal and intense, but Victor fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. Michael, clinging to Emma, fired his pistol at the approaching guards, his heart pounding in his chest. In the midst of the chaos, the man in the lab coat shouted orders, his calm demeanor shattered by the unexpected resistance. Michael could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that he was losing control. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, Michael saw an opening. He grabbed Emma's hand and bolted for the door, Victor covering them as they ran. They raced through the mansion, bullets whizzing past them, the sounds of pursuit growing louder with every step. They burst out into the open air, sprinting toward the perimeter of the estate. But as they reached the fence, a final shot rang out, and Victor stumbled, a cry of pain escaping his lips. "Victor!" Michael shouted, turning back to help him. But Victor waved him off, his face contorted in pain. "Go!" Victor gasped, clutching his side. "Get Emma out of here. Finish this." Michael hesitated, his heart torn. But Victor's eyes were clear. This was his last stand, and he was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to ensure Emma's safety. With a final nod, Michael turned and hoisted Emma over the fence, following her as they scrambled to the other side. They ran through the darkness, not stopping until they reached the car Victor had stashed nearby. Michael shoved Emma into the passenger seat and jumped behind the wheel, his hands shaking as he started the engine. As they sped away from the estate, the sound of gunfire faded into the distance, and Michael felt a mixture of grief and determination settle over him. "We did it, Emma," he said, his voice trembling. "We're going to finish this." The drive back to the city was a blur, and by the time they reached Victor's safe house, the sun was beginning to rise. Michael knew they didn't have much time. With Victor gone, it was up to him to see the plan through. He quickly set up the live broadcast, connecting the encrypted feed to every major news outlet, social media platform, and independent journalist he could think of. As the files began uploading, Michael took a deep breath, his hands steady on the keyboard. "This is for you, Lily," he whispered, his voice filled with resolve. "And for you, Emma." With a final click, the broadcast went live. The world was about to see the truth about Luminex, about the experiments, about the people who had tried to destroy them. As the files began streaming out to the world, Michael turned to Emma, who was watching him with wide, trusting eyes. "It's over, Emma," he said, pulling her into his arms. "We did it." But even as he spoke, the reality of what they had just done began to sink in. They had exposed powerful people, and the fallout would be immense. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of peace. He had kept his promise to Lily, to find the truth and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And now, as the sun rose over Los Angeles, he knew that he had finally done what was right. Emma leaned into him, her small body trembling with relief. "What happens now?" Michael kissed the top of her head, his heart filled with a fierce protectiveness. "Now we start over, together." As the first rays of sunlight bathed the city in a warm glow, Michael knew that this was the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to find hope again. They had faced the darkness and emerged on the other side. It was time for rebirth, and whatever came next, Michael was ready. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.